once had a wife to mourn for his life. 3 children, they were brave. But that cowardly killer that shot Mr. Miller has laid old Otis in his grave. Yeah!
Man, these 2 games. I played the first Red Dead so many times as a kid that I knew every single inch of that gigantic map. Everything about that first Red Dead was right, from the horse riding to the score to the look of the world. Practically flawless, the game provides us with an immensely satisfying and uniquely cinematic experience. An experience that's realistic without being annoyingly so. Time-consuming but extremely worthwhile. Now, Rockstar has delivered some of the most praised video games to date, not the least of which the GTA series. Like the GTA games, the Red Dead games are filled to the brim with all sorts of zany characters to meet, maybe even zanier, and interesting collectibles to unearth. The detailed world contains so many varied challenges to take on, treasures to uncover, outlaws to fight. Red Dead 2 prioritizes ethos over anything. At the same time, there's twice, if not triple, the amount of random discoverables to come across. But in either game, subtly coming across, say, a dinosaur bone feels like you actually ran a hidden treasure to ground because the bone is placed in such an arbitrary location that it's actually rewarding to discover. Meeting all of the interesting characters is as entertaining as a vicious gunfight. Now, I've invested quite a bit of time into these games. That's in large part due to the characters, especially the protagonists John Marston and Arthur Morgan. My god, I mean, you talk about well-written characters, complex, nuanced characters. You would have to be soulless not to feel John finally returning home to his ranch after what feels like an Odyssey-length journey, especially after Red Dead 2 shed some light on how John got and built that ranch and how in doing so he grew to be a loving family man. It helps that both Red Dead games are quite long, supplying us with dozens upon dozens of hours of enthralling gameplay. With John and Arthur, John got a whole game to himself, as well as that zombie-fueled DLC, which I loved, in addition to having a decent chunk of Red Dead 2 dedicated to him. Even though Arthur only had one game, it has double, maybe even triple the amount of content, so that it feels like we're given adequate time with each protagonist when you compare the two. I remember popping in Red Dead 2 for the first time and being like, I don't really want to care about Arthur, but it only took a few hours of playing to realize the ride I would be in for with him. And by his last ride before confronting Dutch with John, I was already thinking that this might be the greatest game ever. With the first 2 Red Dead games getting it right as astonishingly as they did, I'm hesitant to even say that I want a 3rd game. So, while we all know that they should Rockstar make a 3rd game? Let's remember the story of the Van der Linde gang ends with the first Red Dead. The stylish visuals of Red Dead 2's credits leave us right where the first Red Dead begins, with Ross forcing John to hunt down his former gang members right after finishing his ranch and patching things up with Abigail and Jack. Currently, the story is complete. Jack seeks his retribution on Ross for using and killing John, then the one and only title card appears on the screen. The end. So before we talk about a potential 3rd story, I think it's worth mentioning that not making a 3rd game is totally reasonable, considering that Rockstar poured their heart and souls into these 2 games. A 3rd story lets in the possibility of trying to recapture lightning in a bottle, if you will. We already have a sufficient beginning, middle, and end. A 3rd story would have to give us a new ending. Considering that Dutch and the Van der Linde gang are integral in both Red Dead 1 and Red Dead 2, the Red Dead games at their core are about the gang. But that gang is no more, so should a story that doesn't really incorporate that gang be a part of the Red Dead series? I mean, as good as the series currently stands, maybe it should be laid to rest. Pushing out another game is risky. I know that's pessimistic of me. It's not that I don't want another game to adore, I just don't want an already great story to be unnecessarily extended out of obligation rather than inspiration. I am making this video because I love and respect the first 2 games so much that, of course, as a fan, I'd be thinking about what a 3rd game could look like, where or when it could take place. Who wouldn't? If we got Red Dead 2 after Red Dead 1, Rockstar could certainly outdo themselves a 3rd time. It's more a matter of whether or not they should. Do they feel as though their story is not yet finished? So this video is not about whether or not Red Dead Redemption 3 should exist. It's about what I think could work should we actually get a Red Dead Redemption 3. With that being said, the story would have to move forward chronologically. I appreciated going back in time with Red Dead 2 and thought it worked. but going back further in time again would feel repetitive this time around. However, I do think that there's more story material should they go back in time, because we'll get to play as all these characters that have already been created. It would be a matter of crafting backstories and showing the genesis stage of Dutch's gang, focusing on a young Dutch, Hosea, Arthur, and John, before the more recent characters showed up like Javier and Bill. My issue is that playing as John or Arthur again could take away from their respective sacrifices. At the same time, playing as a young Dutch or Hosea wouldn't really suit the Red Dead games at all. While Dutch and Hosea are monumentally vital to the story and compelling enough characters, a good Red Dead protagonist needs to be someone who has the capacity for change, someone who's always had conviction but never truly put it into practice. I get the sense that Hosea has always been a con man with a good heart, and that Dutch has always been a charismatic but delusional smooth talker. Plus, the gunslinging attribute is way more appealing to John or Arthur as opposed to the enigmatic Dutch or Hosea. Sadie or Charles, however, would be way more suited to be Red Dead protagonists. This means that the earliest it could take place would be 1914, the year that the first Red Dead ended in. It could also be set sometime post-1914 but pre-1920, which could coincide with the First World War. Now, this period leading up to the 1920s laid the groundwork for massive change. A core theme of the Red Dead games is change. Not just the change of heart, but the changing times. During this time, towns like Valentine, Rhodes, and Strawberry would turn into ghost towns only for cities like Saint Denis to take their place. Laws were put into place so that a civilized and informed public sphere could bloom. This meant that the number of outlaws was gradually dwindling. Arthur pointed this out as often as he could. Since World War I was not fought in North America, the war should not directly impact the game's story, but it could be a gripping backdrop or a means to bring the characters together. I think any time past 1920 would be too modern. We should stick to the late 1800s or early 1900s. My vote is for 1917. The next thing to figure out would be, who the fuck do we play as? Good question. The first and most obvious choice is Jack Marston. The way things left off, Jack avenges his father by killing Ross, becoming what his parents didn't want him to, just like them. After Jack pulls the trigger, he looks at his gun with a facial expression that's a cross between, oh, so this is what it's like to kill, and what have I just done? I think it would be interesting for Jack to explore the world that he grew up in, albeit in a different time, so that he could discover the power of an outlaw, or perhaps the fleeting and often misguided power of one. Jack could take a page out of Sadie's book, abandoning the potential of raising a family and his past innocent interests like books, in lieu of heading down a darker path, like bounty hunting. Perhaps diving into this world could be a way for him to work through his issues of losing his father after he did the government's dirty work, issues of growing up in a gang instead of in a home surrounded by a loving family. You could play as an angry, hot-headed Jack heading down a dark path, cynical about the new century just like the gang was, and pursue killers, gangsters, and other terrible people. So much so that Jack could become just like the gang, maybe even more brutal than anything we saw or did as John or Arthur. And we saw some fucked up shit with those two. This could culminate to a point where Jack realizes how far he's gone, from the kid who loved storytelling and just wanted to write books, to a madman who has plunged himself so deep in a hole of ruthless vengeance that he almost lost sight of anything else. This could be his redemption arc. Jack could meet new friends and allies along the way only to lose them. Maybe he can lose them because of his own mistakes. Maybe Jack wouldn't need to die like John or Arthur. The government isn't really hunting Jack like they were hunting John or Arthur. Other gangs and people might be hunting Jack, but maybe the Pinkertons could sit this one out. This way, Jack's redemption could be felt and realized. He could go from someone who wanted nothing to do with violence to someone who became worse than his parents, until he finally became someone better than the entire gang who raised him. Instead of perishing, Jack's story could end with him penning stories of real redemption as he's experienced it, and read about in the journals he inherited from John and Arthur. Metaphorical tales that resemble the gang's struggles and his own. Jack was always fascinated with fantasy and adventure stories. In his last conversation with his father in the first Red Dead, Jack and John even speak about Jack becoming a writer. This kind of ending would be an incredible payoff to what Arthur always wanted for John and what John ultimately wanted for Jack, to be content and at peace from the erroneous wrongdoings of the gang. Jack could be the only good thing to result from the Vanderlyn gang. His horrid past behind him, he finds his way to a beautiful place like Tahiti and lives a happy life. Now, it would be wrong to make a Red Dead Redemption 3 and not bring back the fan favorites, Sadie Adler and Charles Smith. The remaining alive members of Dutch's gang wouldn't really have a purpose other than cameos or being briefly mentioned. Strauss was kicked out in disgrace. Mary Beth and Tilly have moved on with their lives. Trelawney, Pearson, and Reverend Swanson weren't the gunslinger types. Now, Charles and Sadie have interesting arcs that actually parallel each other, but in reverse. Charles starts out as a hardened gang member, but with a heart of gold, helping the Wapiti tribe deal with the government, riding with Arthur no matter what, and helping John find Micah in the end, to then wanting a family life up north in Canada. whereas Sadie had a loving family life with her husband until his untimely death at the hands of the O'Driscolls, at a point in which she took refuge with the Vanderlyn gang and decided not to pursue a family life ultimately, and instead live out the remainder of her days as a bounty hunter. These two were the most important allies of Arthur and John to emerge from Red Dead 2, easily. They're the ones fighting by your side with Arthur throughout, and again as John as he hunts down Micah to avenge Arthur. There's plenty of story material for both of them. Now Charles wanted a family, and after properly burying Arthur and helping John build his ranch so that John could start his family life, I'd say he certainly earned his. Maybe Sadie should be more of a focus than Charles. She's already pursuing a violent life, but a violent life has the potential for redemption. Maybe that side of Sadie didn't die with her husband, but was instead pushed down so deep because she needed to get in touch with her dark side so that she could return to the Sadie she once was. Her violent life could bring her into contact with Jack. Perhaps she's hired to bring him to justice or be killed. Two characters who are working out their issues with violence but learning to return to their genuine selves. Conversely, what if Jack seeks out Sadie in his quest? Because he's made some real enemies, people are after him. So since Jack would have access to Arthur's journal and his father's, he'd know that Sadie is the wrecking force you want to go into battle with. She also understands what it means to be an outlaw and a family person. So the duality that's present in her mind could lead to some deeply effective psychological moments for her character that could affect Jack in similar ways. As I said, I really do think Charles has earned a relaxing life, but it'd be a shame not to include him. But this is where the World War I backdrop could come into play. For the first 3 years of the conflict, the US adopted and maintained a policy of neutrality. Among a variety of reasons, the main reason for the US entering the war was when Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare against American civilian ships. What if Charles's family was on one of those ships, or a friend of his from back in his early days prior to his time with the Vanderlyn gang? This loss could force Charles down a dark path again, or just compel him to travel to America and investigate. So World War I could be used as the circumstances to bring Charles into the story, but it's not the focus of the story. Perhaps this dark path leads him to Jack and Sadie, or his investigations of his fallen family leads him to trouble in the region. He hears word of the Marston name and Sadie's name. He tracks them down only to become part of their team, just like when he joined Sadie and John to find Micah. Charles could even sacrifice his life for Sadie and Jack too. I think if they bring these characters back to create a story that has them fighting one last battle against change and society before Jack and maybe Sadie rise above it all to actually live the life Arthur wanted for John and John wanted for Jack, this would give Jack, Sadie, and Charles their own unique chapters in the Red Dead series. These scenarios that I've laid out are very vague intentionally. I've left a lot to be filled in, but it's a basic, logical continuation of the story in my opinion. I'd love to see Charles actually sacrifice his life for Jack, or Jack and Sadie, like Arthur did for John, or John did for his family. It would be very fitting for his character, especially since, as I said, his family would have been taken from him. So these two are the last remnants he even has of a family. It would let Charles die as the hero we know that he is. And it would leave Jack on a better path, and it would make everything Arthur, John, and Charles died for worth it. So that the Vanderlyn gang could die with the dying West and dying breed of outlaws, and Jack can enter a new era free of gang violence and gunslinging. Maybe he even starts his own family. I think this is how Red Dead Redemption 3 could have a captivating story on par with its two predecessors. They could bring the story to a close and end it on an optimistic note. What do y'all think? Thank you so much for listening. If you guys like this video, give it a thumbs up, comment, subscribe to the channel. I'd be more than appreciative if you did. Have a great day. I will see y'all next week. Take care, everybody. Stay safe.
And with his brother Frank robbed the Blackwater Bank and stopped the Glendale train. Poor Otis had a wife to mourn for his life, 3 children and they were brave. But that cowardly killer that shot Mr. Miller has laid old Otis in his grave.